All right, kiddos, you guys can head to your rooms. And adults, you can grab your Bibles and open to the book of Proverbs. As we continue in our series on Proverbs, finding wisdom on wealth through this book. Last week, if you missed last week, we introduced this little picture that I want to put on the screen for you now that kind of shows you there's really only 4 or 5 things that you can do with your money. These are the only options that there are. So when you have money come in, you can live, give, owe, and grow with your money. Those are the only things. And then the owe one is what we focused on last week, and it really kind of splits into a couple different categories. You owe taxes, and your debt is also what you owe. And so those are the 2 types of owing that we do. But then we also want to talk, so this week we want to talk about the live bucket. So out of these 4 places that you can spend your money, this week we're going to talk about that live component. And the angle I want to approach this at, the live category those are all of your living expenses, right? So your rent, your clothes, your cell phone, your internet service, everything, your food, all of that stuff falls under that category, right? And so obviously it's essential. We have to spend money in this area. So that's not what we're going to talk about or what we're going to question tonight. Instead, what I want us to question is the concept of, is it ever enough? Because I think we don't really grasp that concept very well because we never have enough, do we? It's kind of built into our human nature that we can never have enough money or enough possessions or enough things. And so I want us to talk about living in that type of mindset. You know, I mentioned earlier that I'm a huge March Madness fan, basketball fan. I love it. And so I've been watching championship week. All the conference tournaments were being played this week. And it was really interesting to me that SoFi is a company. It's a finance company. And they're sponsoring one of the conference tournaments. And so, you know, every commercial break, you'd see 2 or 3 of their commercials. And one of the commercials, two commercials that they had stood out to me. One of them was a young lady who said, "Hey, SoFi helped me pay off $23,000 of credit card debt." And then she talked about the freedom that she has now that she doesn't have this credit card debt that SoFi helped her pay off by giving her a consolidation loan. And then the second commercial that SoFi showed was along the same lines, and it was directed at millennials and told how millennials are great and they're real creative and they do lots of really good things, but one thing they're not good at is credit cards, and they're buried under mountains of credit card debt. But thankfully, SoFi is there to help them. And so they show this magician who has all of these credit cards in his hands, and he says, because of SoFi, and he puts all the credit cards together, SoFi can make all of your credit card debts disappear completely. And I thought, this is amazing. I got to get in on this. I got to figure out how to get rid of all of my credit cards. So here's what I did. I went to the website that they listed, and I gave them my email address so that they can help me get rid of my mountains and mountains of credit card debt and just pay all that off for me. I thought that would be fantastic of them. That's how generous of them to be willing to pay all that off for me and just eliminate all of my credit card debt. And the experience that I've had this week has been an interesting one, because here's what has happened. Well, first of all, let me say, I hope you, even just 4 weeks into this series, that you recognize SoFi did not pay off their credit card debt. SoFi did not eliminate that girl's credit card debt. She still has $23,000 of debt. It's just now bundled differently. It's in a different package, right? It's not in her credit cards anymore. But I thought that commercial with the magician was brilliant, because that's exactly, they were telling you, they're broadcasting exactly what they're doing. It is a sleight of hand trick where they make all of this disappear, but you're not supposed to be looking at what's actually taking place over here, right? And here's what my experience was. Just by giving them my email address and saying, hey, help me with my credit card debt, even though I'm not interested in that, I wanted to see how they would react to it. I got email after email after email after phone call with offers of personal loans so that I could take that dream vacation that I've always wanted to take, because now I don't have any credit card debt. I could now borrow that extra money to install a pool in my yard because I don't have credit card debt. I could buy a home. They offer me mortgage or refinance options. I can do those things now. What else did they offered me? Oh, I need a new car. So they sent me their auto rates, and they would pre-approve me for an auto loan because now I don't have this debt anymore. So now I've got to go get something else, and I can add to it. And that is exactly the mentality of the world that pushes in against us and tells us, look, you don't have enough stuff. So let's just pretend that this debt that you've built up doesn't actually exist, and let's put it in a position over here to where you can now grab more stuff. You can get an extra car, and you can get an extra vacation, and you can buy all of these different things. The entire world is screaming at you continually, take more, take more, take more. You need it. You deserve it. This is for you. In fact, one of those commercials, it was just that this is not right. It made a moral claim that it's not right that you have so much credit card debt because housing costs are too expensive and because cost of living is too much. You have too many bills to pay, and that's why you have all this credit card debt. And so it's kind of it's not really your fault approach as well. Let us take care of that for you. And the mentality goes that in SoFi, they're in the business of making money, right? They are not being generous. They are not out to help you. They are out to take even more of your money. And so they're going to find ways, and psychologically, they know that if you eliminate your credit card debt, well, then mentally, my credit card bill is zero. I don't owe anything there. So now I can start swiping the plastic again and buy those things that I want and those things that I need that I just have to have and can't live without. Then what do you have? Then you have more credit card debt along with a personal loan, and it just keeps building and building. And we are never wise enough to recognize that enough is enough. Some point we have to stop the spending, and we have to start realizing that we need to live within our means. But we don't do that very well, do we? Because we can never have enough. We are plagued by this four-letter word. Our entire culture is consumed by this four-letter word, M-O-R-E, more. I have to have more. So let's talk about that a little bit tonight. And I want us to look at this in terms of greed, because what we are describing, the emails I got this week, the phone calls I got this week, played directly into the sin of greed. It was all about, let's help you get even more stuff. So what do we mean when we say greed? How would we define greed? Well, there's a number of different ways we could define it and ways that we could look at it. Here's how I want us to understand greed, all right? Greed is wanting something so badly that you cannot figure out how to be happy without it. It is wanting something so bad, desiring it so much that you are never going to be happy unless you have that. Once you have gotten to that state of mind, you have entered the territory of greed. See, greed is not so much about the stuff that you have. And we can look at different lifestyles even represented in this room, and some of us in this room have more stuff than others of us do, and we fall into the comparison trap all the time, and we try to keep up with the Joneses, and we do all those things, but greed is not about how much stuff you have. It's about the stuff you have never being enough. And so Proverbs addresses this concept in a couple different places. And so let's begin by looking at Proverbs chapter 23, verses 4 and 5. Proverbs 23, 4 and 5 says this: don't wear yourself out to get rich, because you know better, stop it. As soon as your eyes fly to it, meaning rich or wealth, it disappears, for it makes wings for itself and it flies like an eagle to the sky. Here's one of the biblical principles, one of the pieces of wisdom that the book of Proverbs gives us when it comes to handling this concept of greed, and it's this. Ultimately, there is no security in money. Man, we think if I just had enough money, then I would be okay, and that life would just be breezy, and that everything would work out. If I just had some more money, then I would be secure. But the Bible tells you, no, actually, you wouldn't be, because look what happens when you try and chase money. It grows wings and it flies away. How many of you have experienced that, right? You have gotten your paycheck, it's Friday, and then Saturday afternoon, you look at your bank account and you go, where did it go? I've already spent my entire paycheck. How did that happen? It just grabbed wings and it took off and it's gone. There's no security in that, right? I think it's interesting that this proverb says, because my translation says, because you know better, and some translations may say, because of your understanding, that you ought to stop this. Now, the Hebrew is really interesting here because we're not really sure how to translate this. This is the best we can come up with, and we're not sure if the Hebrew language is communicating here, because you have understanding, you know that you should stop doing that. Or if it's communicating, when you stop doing that, you'll gain understanding. I think there's room for it it's so ambiguous that we can actually gain some insights from both perspectives, right? It is a little circular that when you stop pursuing riches, you gain understanding. And if you have understanding, you stop pursuing riches as your only end goal. And so it does kind of work that way. But it is one of those things that riches are fleeting. They disappear on us quickly. Have you ever seen those images or those pictures where if you don't really focus at it, you can kind of make out a shape of something in the picture, but as soon as your eyes focus in on that shape, it's gone, it disappears, and you can't see it anymore? That's exactly what Proverbs is describing riches are, that you know they're there and they're out there, but the more you try and focus in on them and the more you make that the focal point of your life, the quicker it's going to fleet from your life. Wealth acts just like that. And if you stare at something that disappears, what are you ultimately staring at? Nothing of substance, right? And so Proverbs is telling us, hey, if your entire focus of your life is about getting rich, then you are a fool. Because those riches, that wealth, it's going to disappear on you. It is going to grow wings and it is going to fly away. You need to focus on something other than riches. Here's something else that greed does that Proverbs tells us about. Proverbs 28, 22 through 25. It says, a greedy one is in a hurry for wealth. He doesn't know that poverty will come to him. One who rebukes a person will later find more favor than the one who flatters with his tongue. The one who robs his father or mother and says, that's no sin, is a companion to a person who destroys. A greedy person stirs up conflict, but whoever trusts in the Lord will prosper. You guys know what greed creates, what greed produces? It produces exactly what this proverb tells us. It produces blindness, it produces entitlement, and it produces conflict. When we become greedy, those three things enter our lives. I think it's interesting that he says that the person who chases riches is going to become poor. Poverty is going to come on them, and they're not even going to realize it. You know, that is exactly the way it happens, because we are so focused on gaining those riches that we become blind to everything else around us. We become blind to the scenario. We become blind to the potential traps and the pitfalls that come with that. And all of a sudden, here we are caught in a snare, and we never even saw it coming. You know, when we value our money more than we value our relationships, we get this sense of entitlement. And entitlement is kind of a buzzword, right? That we hear that a lot now, particularly about the younger generations, my age and younger, right? There's constant statements from those who are my age and older that the younger generations are just so entitled and they feel like everything ought to be given to them and handed to them. And in large, that is a very true statement. And this is what Proverbs is talking about. When we get so focused on greed that we're willing to take from our parents and then say, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And when I say take from our parents, it's not like hey, Dad, can I have $1,000? Or can I take the car this weekend? In this culture, in this context, taking that inheritance from your father or from your family was essentially saying, you are dead to me. Give me what you have because your possessions are worth more to me than you are. Right? So it is a whole nother level. That takes entitlement to another level from what we look at with millennials and Gen Z now, right? It's not even in the same ballpark. But when we talk about entitlement and this, you owe me this, I am owed this money, I am so greedy and I need this money so badly that I'm willing to kill off my parents, essentially, to get it. Yeah, that's a big problem, and greed has taken over your life, and it leads you to blindness, to entitlement, and to conflict. You are constantly going to be butting heads with those who are closest to you. Money, I've said before, money is the number one cause of divorce in America. And it's not always the case that it's like, hey, you and I are just never going to agree on how to spend our money, so we're going to get a divorce. It oftentimes, money is the basis that causes all of the other fights that build on top of it, right? One partner is more greedy than the other, or it causes both of them to be greedy, and you're taking from my money, and I'm taking from your money, and we're constantly clashing here, which means that we're going to fight about every other thing, and it's going to snowball and continually get bigger until we can't stand each other, and then we separate and we divorce, and now all of a sudden we recognize, yeah, money was the ultimate culprit behind that. If we'd been on the same page long ago about how we spend our money, things may have turned out differently. Money creates conflict. Not because it's money in itself, but because of our greed, the way that we approach it and our just insatiable desire to own it and possess it and to get more of it leads to these three negative events and negative consequences in our life: blindness, entitlement, and conflict. You know, it creates that tunnel vision where we can't even see the disaster that's awaiting us. It puts us in this position where we believe that we are owed something. And then it produces this conflict with those relationships that are super close to us that should have more of a priority than that. But what greed does is it continues to grow in us so much to the point that we value and we prioritize profit over people. We prioritize money over our relationships. And Proverbs says that's foolish. If you want to be wise, look at what the last verse of that we just read in chapter 28, verse 25 says, a greedy person stirs up conflict, but whoever trusts in the Lord will prosper. So the alternative to being greedy and causing trouble and causing conflict in your relationships is to trust in the Lord. And when it says the person who trusts in the Lord will prosper, that word prosper literally means to be made fat. Now, I know in today's culture, like, we want the opposite of that, right? We don't, I'm fat enough. I don't need to put on any more weight. I need to figure out how to lose weight. But remember, we're talking about different cultures here. In this culture, extra weight, carrying around a few extra pounds, was a sign that you were a little bit more wealthy, that you had more resources, and that you were more prosperous. And so that's the language that they're using here. It's like, hey, if you trust in God, you're going to get fat. That's not a good church growth strategy for 2021, right? That doesn't help us now, but in this culture, that made perfect sense, that if you want to be prosperous, if you want to be wealthy, if you want to be well off, trust in God, don't be greedy, okay? And here's why. Proverbs doesn't just leave us hanging with this. It gives us an answer and it gives us a solution to this and tells us an explanation for why this is, and that's because little is better than more in God's economy. Little is better than more in God's economy. Proverbs 15, verses 16 and 17 says, better a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with turmoil. Better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened ox with hatred. All right, we see these kinds of proverbs all the time in about different topics where Proverbs will compare one thing with another. And my first question when I see these, and if you're like me, this is your first question, is, can we have both? right? Like, why does it have to be better to have nothing with God than great riches with turmoil? Well, why can't I have God and great riches? Or better to have nothing, have peace with some vegetables than turmoil with the fattened ox? And my question is, can't I have both? Can I not have love and a steak? You can keep your nasty vegetables. I want love and I want happiness and I want a big, fat, juicy steak. That's what I want. Why can't I have both of these? Proverbs is not giving us a clear-cut contrast saying it has to be an either or, right? Remember, Proverbs gives us different guidance points and principles and things to help steer us, but it's not always a black and white, cut and dry. It has to be this or this. He's giving us some guidelines. And here's what he's saying. If you're in a position where you have to choose the better. And here's what the better is. The better is choosing love over riches. The better is choosing to be content with a mediocre meal than to be greedy with an expensive meal. Right? That's the distinction that Proverbs is guiding us to. It doesn't always mean that we have to pick between one or the other. Here's something else that I think is important for us to recognize when we're talking about this subject of greed and little and more. More does not always mean bigger or better. We think about it that way most of the time, that wanting to have more means I have to have a bigger house, or I need a nicer car, or I need to upgrade my phone, or I have to have the latest and greatest, and that's how we think of greed. But sometimes, in fact, much of the time, greed displays itself in terms of frequency. And here's what I mean. I have to have Chick-fil-A 3 or 4 times a week. I have to have Starbucks every single day. I have to buy this particular thing all the time. And I think what we fail to recognize is that in itself fits in this description of having to have more. We have to have more and more and more stuff. In fact, I think when we're talking about money and spending money wisely and handling your money the way that God wants us to, I think one of the greatest separators between you and your future wealth is the consistent little purchases. $3 here, $4 here, $6 here. We have to keep spending all this stuff. And, we go out to eat and, we buy the $20 steak instead of the $16 steak, right? It never stops. We keep adding to it. We constantly have to add more stuff to it. We got to eat out more. We got to do this. We got to buy these things. We need the extra package of food or chips or whatever it is. We constantly are buying more and consuming more and consuming and consuming and consuming. And we fall into this trap of I have to have more. And when we recognize that, by the time we recognize that, oftentimes it's too late to make a change to your habit without great effort, right? Because how many of you have your habit? When I mention Chick-fil-A or Starbucks or whatever, you guys all of a sudden are like, oh yeah, I know, here's mine. What if you cut that in half next week? Ooh, I don't know if I can do that. That's only going to Starbucks twice next week. That's a big ask, right? Like that's too much. See, we're already caught in this trap of I have to have more. You don't have to have that. And I know that makes me the bad guy for saying that. And I'm not shaming anyone or dictating how you ought to spend your money. I'm simply drawing attention to the fact that we fall into this trap super easily. And like the blindness point from the last segment, we don't recognize it until it's already past that point. And we've already fallen into this trap. We constantly feed this desire of more, and it never stops. I cannot tell you the number of conversations over the years I have had with people who tell me they want to do great things for God, and if I just had this, then I could do it. If I just made a little bit more money, then I could afford to tithe. And here's my answer to this. No. That's not the way it works. See, that is what I call the if-then trap. If I have this, then I can do this. But here's the thing. it's not the amount that dictates your patterns and your behavior. It's the mindset behind it. And you're not going to escape that trap with that by using that trap, right? So if I make $30,000 a year, man, then if I made 50, then I would be financially secure, and I would be much better off, and then I could afford to give more and to be more generous and to do these extra things, and I would feel comfortable and safe. And what happens when you start making $50,000 a year? Man, if I just made $75,000 a year, then I would feel safe, and I would have the comfort and security that I'm looking for. Then you make 75, and then what do? Man, if I could just get to that 100 mark. Why? Well, this cycle never ends. It just keeps growing with us, right? My goal, I want a truck. I want a truck so badly. And I've never owned a truck of my own, and I want one. And if I just had a truck, then I'd be happy. False. Because if I had a truck, then I would have to have a boat. And if I just had a boat, then I would be happy, right? If I just had a bigger house, then I would be happy. No, because then I'd have to fill that house with all kinds of crap. If I just had a bigger paycheck, then I could give more. No, you wouldn't, because then you're going to spend that money on other things that you want, and then you're going to look at the leftover and go, ooh, I still don't have enough to give, so I can't be generous yet. But man, if I just get another raise, then I'll be in a position to do it. Now I've got everything I need, but I just need that next little bit. And we are caught in this if-then trap, which is a clear symptom of greed taking a foothold in our lives. Let's figure out how we avoid that, right? And here's how I think we do that. Proverbs 3. Verses 13 through 18. Happy is a man who finds wisdom and who acquires understanding. For she is more profitable than silver, and her revenue is better than gold. She's more precious than jewels. Nothing you desire can equal her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left, riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant, and all her paths peaceful. She's a tree of life to those who embrace her, and those who hold on to her are happy. Now that sounds like a life worth living, doesn't it? Just compare, since Proverbs likes to compare and contrast. Compare the last passage I read that was full of blindness and conflict and entitlement and killing your parents. And that's the symptom, that's the result of greed. The result of pursuing wisdom is happiness. And it's life, and it's joy, and it's peace. That is the goal. So wisdom leads to contentment, which then in turn leads to peace. And I think I actually skipped the overall principle for this entire message. But this is a good place to bring it in. Here's your money principle number 4. Greed will always guide you to an unfulfilled life. That's what Proverbs tells us. Greed is always going to lead you to an unfulfilled life. That pursuit of more is never going to be enough. That's why I love that movie, The Greatest Showman, right? Have you ever seen The Greatest Showman? Hugh Jackman's amazing, and I know I'm always referencing you guys to Hugh Jackman movies, and that's good because his movies have such great moral stories behind them, whether it's Kate and Leopold or The Greatest Showman or Wolverine, whatever it is. I mean, there's great moral stories built into all of these movies. I was kidding about Wolverine, but in this movie, The Greatest Showman, he takes. It follows the story of the Barnum and Bailey circus crew, right? And this guy, he builds this empire on the downcast and the excluded from society and makes a show out of them so that people want to come see these freaks of nature, and he builds this great business out of it, and all the fame that comes with that. The whole moral of the story is the more wealth and the more fame and the more publicity he gets, the more he wants and the more he destroys what really matters to him, right? In fact, there's one of the prettiest songs in this entire musical sung by the character Jenny Lind is Never Enough. And the lyric of that song is perfectly appropriate to what the book of Proverbs teaches us. One of the lines from that song says that towers of gold are still too little, and these hands could hold the world, but it'll never be enough. Never, 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 never be enough for me. Man, is that not our attitude? Whenever we get something, we think it's going to make us happy, but the result is, no, that's not enough. I need more. 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 And it never, never is enough. The solution to that, Proverbs says, is to chase after wisdom. Forget about the riches. They cannot compare to what you will find in wisdom. When you pursue wisdom, when you pursue the things of God, when you chase after that,